Hello and a very good morning to everyone. I'm Dilini and I welcome you to Tutor.lk, and I will be tutoring business communication for AAT Level 2 students. I will start with a brief introduction of myself. I'm Dilini Chandra and I'm from Kurunegala. I graduated from University of California, where I did English as a major subject. And once I finished my first degree, I started working at University of Sri Lanka in the ELTU, English Language Teaching Unit, that is. And while I was working there, I started working on my master's. I did my first master's in international relations because I wanted to join diplomacy, like foreign service or something like that. But then I shifted my working place to Sri Lanka Institute of Advanced Technological Education. So as I was pursuing a career in the academics, then I had to shift to another master's. So I'm currently reading for my master's in English Studies at University of Colombo. So that's about me, and I believe I have to give you a small introduction about business communication at Tutor.lk, but this is specifically for AAT Level 2 students, and why we have included business communication at this level. Because most of you might be wondering, why do we have to learn English at this level as well? But this is a completely different field: accountancy, business studies, economics. So all of these subject areas take different terminology. They take different ways of communication, written or oral communication. They require specific terminology, vocabulary, and different formats of dealing with communication with maybe foreign clients and with your authorities, higher authorities, your senior members of the staff, and maybe you're supposed to handle a meeting. In all these situations, you need to use the international language and our second language, English. And that is why we have taken the trouble. AAT actually has taken trouble to go through and produce this very good textbook for you guys. And we'll be basically working on these things. And in a moment, I will take you through the chapters that we have to work with, the content specifically. As you can see, we start with conversational skills, which actually covers a wide area, which is really important and necessary in a field like business studies, accountancy, and economics. So we start with formal and informal communication, where we figure out where to speak formally and where to speak informally, because you can speak to a colleague, your work colleague, in an informal language, hello macang and this and that, but you're not supposed to use that kind of language when you deal at a meeting, at a conference, in a presentation, which is a business presentation for your company. You need to use a certain level of formality in your language, and you need to come up with the proper words to say the necessary things that you're supposed to say. So these kind of differences in English, even though we do not really go into specifying there's a written English language and there's a spoken English language, like in Sinhala or Tamil, where you have totally different grammar functions and structures. In English, it's the same structure, but the level of formality is indicated with the vocabulary we use. So those things will be focused on in this lesson thoroughly, and I think you will gain a really good knowledge from the chapter 1 when it comes to handling your communication orally. Then from formal and informal communication, we move on to small talk, which is again very necessary to handle yourself amongst colleagues and, out of a formal situation. How do you make small talk with people around you? How to make new friends in your industry, your careers, how to go a step further in your career, making small talk, which is really necessary for your day-to-day life. And then there are certain structures that are needed for the next few kind of topics: giving instructions and directions, comparing and contrasting of facts, figures, and statistics, agreeing and disagreeing, and giving opinions. So these three areas actually, again, like I said, require specific vocabulary and grammar structures. So they will be focused on this particular lesson or chapter. So that's about conversational skills. And then we'll look at the chapter 2, which is again something that we should do as a, I would say, culture, more of a culture. Develop this as a culture in your life, which is reading. But here we focus on academic reading skills, which is a really, really necessary thing in our lives. Especially this focuses on things like understanding the basic terminology in accounting and business. Terminology in the sense jargon, technical jargon that is specific to areas or fields of study like accounting or business. It varies from the terminology that you study specifically under economics, accounting, and business. It comes from, because this is a second language. It's not our mother tongue, it's the second language. So how do we express the same things that we think of in our mother tongue in another language? And this is English. How do the native speakers of English refer to things in accounting? So it could be, very specific things like the things that you have in accounting. For example, think of a balance sheet. What is the definition of that? How specific is the usage of that in your work environment? How can you use the same word in another context? So understanding the basic terminology that you come across in your fields of study. That's what we focus firstly under this chapter. Excuse me. Pardon me of the technical issues that I have. So as I was saying, we were discussing what's studied or what are you going to learn under academic reading skills. So the second topic takes you through another very theoretical part of English, and when you refer to excuse me, reading skills, understanding cohesion and coherence of a paragraph on matters of accounting and business related information. So in this kind of a topic, we focus more on reading skill, your reading skill. How do you handle a reading and understand? And coherence and cohesion, they include certain theoretical parts, like I mentioned earlier, where you understand things like referencing and certain parts like transitional phrases, and also lexical and grammatical parts of cohesion in your level, right? We are not going in deep like you're studying the language English in linguistic terms or applied linguistic terms. This will be done really on the surface level, but for you, enough for you to understand a paragraph and realize, okay, these kind of words help us understand the content of a paragraph better, right? Cohesion and coherence basically mean your comprehension of a certain passage. So they will be done or discussed with examples, and you will be given activities to do so, because evaluation and practice makes perfect, right? So the third topic here, it takes you to interpreting graphs, tables, diagrams on matters of business interest, which is something you have to do all the time in your field. You look at graphs, tables, data presented as different illustrations. So how do you read it accurately? How do you use the correct combination of words to bring out the meaning that you need to tell another person, maybe a client, maybe one of your potential employers? So how do you do it in a way that you stand out from a crowd? So that makes you special if you are really good at interpreting graphs and charts, diagrams, statistics, and all that related to your field of study. So knowing that, changing a paragraph into an illustration, you take some statistics and put it in a graph. So likewise, doing it vice versa, right? We are learning that as well. And it comes through reading, because looking at a graph itself and giving the information in it is actually reading a graph or a graphical illustration, which means you are actually required to have this skill under reading skills. So we'll be working on that as well. And we have two similar kind of topics, but what we do is different. Reading printed texts and extracting specific information, and reading printed text and extracting general information. So specific to general. How do you figure out specific information and also general information? General information usually refers as in you get a summary or like a rough idea of the entire passage that you read. But specific information might require you to identify a year, some sort of statistics, and it might require you to come up with specific terminology, because we are dealing with a lot of vocabulary specific to your field of study. So in reading, we can learn a lot of words that we use in our writing and speaking. So this will be a very, very good chapter for you to work on your vocabulary and also grammar and other structures of English language. Okay, so that's chapter 2. And then we'll be working on business writing skills. Again, we cannot ignore this particular area, because it's one of the four major skills that we're working when it comes to learning a language. So in writing, you see, when you look at this list of topics, that it covers basically everything that you need to achieve or like master when you study a language. So in writing short instructions, personal notes, notices for accounting and business purposes to practice specific terminologies. So when we read, when we speak, we use different words, and I would say specific words for your specific to your field of study. But how do we use it in written communication? When you write a letter, when you write short instruction materials, personal notes, notices, how do you use these terminologies accurately in your writing? That's what we look at in the first topic, which is very important. And you will find this a really, really good and let's say necessary activity or practice, because once you go into working in your work environment, you will see, oh my god, this how much of these kind of writing that I have to do, documentation, it is required in your job or your profession. So this will help out in achieving it easily. So writing business memos, messages, and instructional materials for administrative purposes. So let's say you have a promotion coming up and you're going to be promoted as area manager, or the head of the accounting branch or whatever. So you actually, of course, you get a higher pay and all, but then you have a lot of other work coming in, right? Writing memos, messages, instructional materials, and you will be given, an administrative status where you have to administer other people and other work. So these kind of tasks require different types of documentation. So writing a memo, it has a specific format to it, and if you make a single mistake, you will look like someone who is incompetent, because these are standard structures or formats developed in different countries, in different purposes. So they have come up with these things because they need to provide information accurately, and the requirement is to actually provide the necessary amount of information. So in a memo, in a business memo, it takes a particular format to do that, and there are standards to follow. So if you are joining a multinational company, then you need to know these things, and that's why they have included this in the textbook, so that you know the format, you follow it correctly, and you outshine everybody else. Right? So then there will be instructional materials where you give instructions. This is the way to do it. Now, being able to produce such a document actually will again stand you out in a crowd, right? Like other employees. So you will do your job better. And then we have writing fax messages and emails for a given situation to external clients and stakeholders. So when you do a job, right, faxing and emails, especially emails, these are really, really pivotal in your field of study, because the communication is now all modern, and we have to, go with the trend, the advancements of the technology and the sciences. So emails actually is a very effective, really fast way of communication, and actually, as a person who receives a lot of emails, to respond to them, right? It's actually really a tedious task. But if you know the correct way to do it, it's not something really that you have to think about. So writing a proper email, how do you write a fax message without, indicating or complicating your message, without offending someone else? So there are standards, again, that you have to follow. And these standards come from the native speakers of the language. So we have to learn it, not because you will be judged by some person, but it's always good to follow a standard so that you will actually belong where you are. So if you are working at an international company, multinational company, you need to know these standards, and they will be really impressed that you already know these things, that they don't have to guide you through it, right? That's why they are here, right? So the AAT has really considered, when they actually produced this textbook, they have gone into a lot of trouble in penetrating through to the really necessary things, focusing on the requirements that you need to be a really good person or professional in the field that you belong. So from fax messages, emails, memos, personal notes, writing notices, all these, right? We cannot forget the last topic, writing business letters of different types using modern formats and formal language forms. So all of these, right, are really necessary. And if you don't know how to manage or how to go about writing a letter, business letter, it could be a letter of apology, request, a letter of complaint, and a letter of thanking somebody. So all of these things are written documentation, and it's a skill that you have to have, because that will get, I mean, it takes you to places where you dream of becoming, sitting at a really large desk, a very good company, working with really interesting people, meeting new people, and all of these can be done if you can perform well in your writing. So here it is, business writing skills, improving your written communication skill to make you a really good professional in your field of study. So chapter 3 deals with another very important skill that you need to possess. Right. With that, we come to chapter 4, which deals with functional grammar. Now, the moment you hear grammar, you're like, oh my God, right? That's there. So, learning a language, this is something basic that we have to go into, because without correct grammar, you cannot make sense. People won't understand you correctly if you don't structure your sentences in the accurate grammar. So, we have here specified certain areas which are necessary, really necessary for your knowledge of producing correct written documents, speaking, when you speak to someone, how do you speak correctly, and then grammar actually will good grammar will actually definitely stand you out from a crowd. People will notice you, that you could use correct English. So this correct English, in the first major concern is speaking grammatically accurate sentences. So we deal with a lot of topics when you compare this chapter to other chapters, but it will be quick because we are not going into producing English teachers. So we are just focusing on students using correct grammar under these topics. So sentence construction, parts of speech, recognizing parts of a sentence, descriptive and narrative writing, the effective use of adjectives and adverbs, which are very simple topics if you consider, but we will focus in relation to your field of study. And then we move on to the use of prepositions, use of passive voice, and the form and use of reported speech, conditional clauses, and relative clauses. These actually, if you take a look at all of these areas, they are really easy to study if you have a really good approach to it. So grammar is only boring if you go on like, okay, follow this structure, and if you do it in a very mechanical way. But there are different and modern ways of looking at these areas, and it's very enjoyable to learn. So we will go through all of that. Right? Don't worry. I mean, we have a lot of activities because practice is what makes it more easier, and if you repeatedly do it, then you will remember. Okay, so these areas will be done with activities in your textbooks and also explanations in very understandable definitions, explanations, examples, and so on. Right. So chapter 4 is basically something really theoretical and structural when it comes to studying English. Okay. Then the chapter 5 and 6 deals with more towards your career development, where you have, other skills, like we would say interpersonal skills, development of these. So business presentation skills, this will actually be the topic that I'm talking about today, right? We'll deal with one of these topics we have. So identifying elements of a business presentation and presentation plan. So we will discuss in further detail, so you will understand how we go about the whole process of it. And we have 3 more topics: using effective language in a presentation, designing informative and persuasive presentations at different levels and different focus groups. So these are things that a person should consider when you go into doing a business presentation. So we will discuss what to do. We will look at videos where, examples are the best way to learn, because if you know someone who is good at presentations, you take a look at his method, the way he does it, how does he go through the whole thing. So if you look at an example, you will understand how accurately and effectively a presentation is done. So we have then delivering presentations using multimedia pointers, flip charts, and videos. So these things, going into using the modern devices of presentations. And this is actually, again, a necessity in any field, because effective presentations will reveal your personality and the capacity of you to handle new or modern devices. So we'll look at how to do that, and then handling questions, answering techniques in presentations, which is something people run away from. So usually people don't like to deal with questions, and even if you have a presentation, in class presentation, what students do is actually you have a negotiation already, like macam mage me prashna ahanda ethaniන් එහාට නම් අහන්න. So like you have these arrangements in the class because you're afraid of questions, but you cannot run away from questions if you're working at an international company, because these people, they're really into posing questions and getting things clarified off. So then in that case, if you fail to answer a question, it reflects bad upon your company, your department. So you have to, if you are doing the presentation, you have to handle it as well. So we'll look at how certain techniques will help us be better at answering questions in presentations. So this is going to be a really interesting lesson to work with, because it is about improving our presentation skills. So the coming out of inhibition, how do you use certain very easy tips to be a better presenter. So it'll be a really interesting drive through this chapter. And that brings us to the last chapter, chapter 6, where we talk about job interview skills, which is basically, when you hear the topic job interview skills, this is, students who are willing to go into work. So how do you find the best or the most suited job for yourself? And how do you impress a potential employer? So writing professional curriculum vitae and covering letters, and requirements for facing interviews, and identifying basic etiquette in job interviews. So these 2 areas, one is actually a written skill, and the other one an oral skill. if you look at the basics of it. So writing a professional CV and covering letter. So for you to impress somebody, you should show off your skills, but you should do it in a professional manner without trying to be boastful or bombastic about it. So how do you follow the standards and work with the most updated version of a CV, because there are so many formats you can find, and find the most accurate or most suited format for your CV, for your field, and then come up with a really good covering letter for that. So we'll discuss all that. The textbook actually provides you with a lot of examples. So you can select one for your CV if you are willing, or if you're looking at writing a good CV. And then the next part is also really important, because not just the CV or the covering letter, they are important, but this is where you score the highest amount of marks. So this is where you land the job. So requirements for facing interviews and identifying basic etiquette in job interviews. So this etiquette, which means like, again, standards that you have to follow when you go into an interview. So without making a fool of yourself, how do you present, again, like your attire, starting from your attire, right? Grooming, retails, and everything. The dress you wear, your haircut, the accessories you're wearing, then what sort of things that you have to focus on, your shoes, from top to bottom, right? And then not just that, and without struggling, how do you speak to the interviewers? If there's a panel, how do you handle yourself in front of them? Do you sit down before they ask you to? These are things that people don't consider mostly, but they, the interviewers or the employers, they look at your personality the moment you enter their building. So you have to be really careful and be aware of these things. So that will be discussed in detail under this chapter. So don't worry, this textbook actually covers the entire package that you need to become a successful professional in your field. So with that, that's actually the end of the introductory presentation. Then I would like to move on to discussing one of the topics, like I said, from chapter 5. I start with that because it's something interesting. It's better than, going into something grammar or, reading or writing, because this is something really practical and you would enjoy listening to. So with that, I would like to finish off this segment where we discussed the textbook and its contents. And now we will go into the lesson, one of the lessons, one topic for today. Okay. So let me quickly share this with you. Okay, so we will work on discussing chapter 5, business presentation skills. We will only be discussing the very first topic, identifying elements of business presentation and presentation plan. So we are going to discuss 7 stages in planning a presentation. Now, a presentation, I think everybody has by now, when you studied AAT, by now you might have done plenty of presentations, let it be academic, business, or for any evaluation purpose. It could be for a conference paper or whatever. So when you go into a presentation, how do you start the entire process of it? you start by planning the whole thing. So first, you do a little bit of thinking, brainstorming into it. Then you then dig into the details of it. And there's a process, and we have identified 7 stages in the planning process of a presentation. So these are going to be really, really important because it's the planning part. If you don't plan your presentation precisely to match the requirement of it, then your presentation is not going to be a success. So these are the 7 stages that I will be discussing today, starting from preparation, choosing your main points, choosing your supporting information, establishing linking statements, developing an opening, developing a conclusion, and then reviewing your presentation. So how do we do it? Let's discuss. Right, we start with preparation. So when you have a presentation to do, let's say your company gave you this task, okay, you have to take care of presenting this promotional presentation for our company. Okay, what do? You have to prepare for that. So the first stage is preparation, but how do you do it? So there are these 4 very important points, right? You have to focus on objectives, audience, venue, and remit. So we'll discuss in detail what these have to do with preparation. So many factors are there in the design of your presentation, and these 4 actually brings it down to the most successful preparation segment. Okay, so what do we mean by objectives? I think this is a very famous and commonly used word, which means the purpose, your outcomes, what do you expect to achieve at the end of your presentation. So you can actually deal with this objective part, like why am I doing this? When you ask yourself certain questions like this, what do you want your audience to have understood? Which means you speak to an audience, but what do you expect them to understand from what you say? That actually will tell you what you're supposed to ready beforehand, right? Your audience, right? What now? If it's a promotional presentation for your company, then your audience might require to understand what you're promoting about. The first thing, right? Is it your company? Is it a new product? Is it a new service that you're planning to do? So something like that. And your audience, like, are they children below a certain age? So then you have to think about impressing that age group. So apply certain elements in your presentation to match the audience, right? Of course, the audience is another topic to speak about, but this is objective. You have to meet those objectives, basically considering what your audience is expected to understand. And then ask yourself, what action do you want your audience to take following your presentation? Do you want them to purchase an item? Do you want them to subscribe to something? Do you want them to, change a particular lifestyle? So focusing on that will help you to figure out what you're supposed to actually do in your presentation, how to go about, maneuver your presentation. So ask yourself that, and that will actually cover another objective of your presentation. And lastly, ask yourself, how can you best design your presentation to meet your objectives? That is also something you do under preparation. Do I do a slideshow? Do I use another platform like Prezi? Do I use a flip chart here? Or do I give them handouts? So how do you best design it? Do you engage, or do you ask them questions? Do you play a video? So include that kind of thought in your preparation part, because that will help you to achieve a better rapport, a relationship with the audience, and making yourself more sensible to them to understand you. Okay, so under preparation, objectives. ඇයි මම මේක කරන්නේ, right? What am I expecting out of this, right? Your outcomes of the presentation. Think about them, then it's actually halfway done. Then under preparation, like I said earlier, you have to consider your audience, right? To whom are you delivering the presentation? Is it the general public? Is it for some school children, O-levels or A-levels or grade 5 students? Whether you are, doing the presentation to women only, or is it men only? So all of these considerations come into play because your presentation has to cater to them, right? So you can ask yourself these questions. How much will your audience already know about your topic? So if you're promoting your company, let's say you're working at an institute where you have, educational services. So you are promoting a newly introducing course. So if you are targeting after A-levels, right, students or children after A-levels, then you need to let them know how useful this is, right? What do they already know about it? Are you aware of your competitors? Likewise, so knowing or trying to guess what they already know about this particular topic will tell you how much you want to give them, right? What sort of information should you give them, right? So that you don't make a fool of yourself. Then you can ask the question, how can you link new material to things they might already understand? So after A-levels, let's refer to the same example. After A-levels, students usually go into computer courses, right? They go into English classes. So they consider that as an additional qualification. So a certificate course, a diploma. They are interested in doing additional or additional interpersonal skills, and they need a qualification, a paper to show, okay, I'm qualified in this. So what we already know is that they usually go to a particular diploma or a certificate course in English, or let's say technology, computer skills, right? Information technology, right? So usually these kind of additional skills, right, can be targeted. So how can you link your new material to what you already know? So considering that actually will help you reach your audience in a better sense, right? Finally, you can ask yourself, will you need to win them over to a particular point of view, right? So this is like portraying a particular view, like changing. Let's consider what Tutor.lk is doing. So we are trying to promote online tutoring, online classes. You go to tuition classes online. So in a pandemic situation like this, where education was really under attack, so this kind of a platform, online classes, is a really, really successful way of reaching to an audience, right? You cater, you have a product, a service that people need, people are looking forward. Like in this pandemic of COVID-19, the least thing you should do is huddle up together and sit in a class. So why don't we use this platform? You sit at your table in your room at home, and then you get the same knowledge online. So this is actually a very successful platform in those terms. So to change that point of view, now people say, okay, it's not successful because we don't know what the students are doing. So parents might be complaining, okay, sitting at a computer, right, is actually my child learning something. So this point of view, that this platform is going to be successful, right? Because we don't know when COVID-19, this pandemic situation will go out. So until the end of it, we can't wait, we can't hold back. But how do you convincingly, address to your audience that this is successful? So if you consider whether you have to win a certain point of view, right, the advantages are better than the disadvantages. So if you wait on those terms, right, your audience will understand or actually be convinced of your point of view. So reach or like consider whether you have to convince or go about telling them or like winning them over to a particular point of view. So then the audience problem will be really easily met with. So decide or actually consider about the audience that you have to speak to. Okay, so then as the third point, venue. This is the place where you're doing the presentation. So if you already know where you're supposed to do the presentation, it's better to go and check the place, right? And if it's a hall, a school hall or a main hall, it could be a theater, it could be a panel of judges sitting in front of you and you're supposed to speak at a podium. So whatever this venue is, right, you have to decide what kind of atmosphere do you wish to create in this place. So if it's a promotional environment, promotional presentation, then you have an audience, general public, that you have to impress. So you have to try giving them some concessions, like you give them a handout, like the basic, you start from that. And also if it's a product or a service, you give them the benefits of it first, right? Likewise, there's things to consider if you actually look at the venue. So what kind of atmosphere do you want to be friendly with them? Do you want to mingle around the audience? So can you do that given your venue? So if you are standing at a podium, that's highly unlikely the chance to go down the stage and talk to the audience. Now at an academic presentation, you're not supposed to do it because you are presenting actually an answer to a question. So the examiners are there to judge you based on what you have worked for. So in that sort of a situation, you don't decide to go and become friendly with the examiners. Of course, you smile and you make a pleasant environment, but you don't go into joking and telling stories about it, because academic presentations actually require particular standards, like a given time, a number of slides. So these things are there, so you have to stick to them. So decide what kind of atmosphere that you wish to create, right? Building the rapport with the audience. Are you asking them questions? Do you wait for them to answer, right? Do you wish them to raise their hands? So if you want to engage the crowd like that, let's go ahead and do it. Because it will be fine, because then the audience is interested in listening to you. Okay, then we have the next question, like how might the room arrangement affect your relationship with the audience? Like I said, like, can you go down the aisles of the audience, right? If the presenter is walking amongst them, it draws attention of the audience. This guy is walking here. So he might ask a question. So likewise, they pay attention. So that's why you should check the venue. Can I walk here and there? Is there a stage? Is there a podium? Where do I keep my stuff? Right? Because you can't really seem to, struggle with your equipment. Maybe if you have a pointer, do you have a ruler? So likewise, you're handling your equipment in your place, right? At the venue. It's very important because it tells a lot about your personality. You can't, stumble and fall. Then it might, seem very clumsy to the audience. So you can't go about things like that. Okay. So the next question, can you do anything to change the arrangement of this room to suit your objectives? And what sort of audiovisual aids can you use? So these are things to consider about the place you're presenting. Can you change the arrangement? Do you want them to sit in a circle or a curve? Or do you have enough space for you to walk down? And do you have the capacity to change any arrangement, seating arrangement to meet your objectives? You have a flip chart or whatever the audio visuals that you're using. Do the audience members have clear access to it? So you should consider these things when you go into a presentation. And usually, be comfortable in the place, because if you are not confident in doing the presentation at the venue, it again affects your presentation in a negative manner. Okay, so when it comes to the last question, it's something you should pay attention to very clearly and carefully. What audiovisual aids can you use? So do you have the chance to use a PowerPoint presentation? Is the audio or sound effects enough for the entire room to hear, right? Do I need to bring in speakers? So these things you should consider, because given the place that you are handling in order to make a very effective presentation. So if you have the chance to actually consider these things, go ahead and do it, because it actually is going to help you prepare well for your presentation, right? So that's why we should consider the venue in a very detailed manner. Okay, that brings to the last point of our presentation, preparation section, remit. This, in simple terms, means the task you are expected to perform, right? For example, I have given you a couple of examples here, right? Like I earlier said, your company might ask you to do a promotional presentation, right, for some clients. Or it could be a presentation done as a Viva presentation about your final project. Right? These are different situations that you might have to do presentations for. So lastly, it could be a paper at a research conference. So these are very different types of presentations: a promotional presentation, a Viva, a paper presentation at a research conference. So these are very different, very distinct presentation types. So the objectives for these presentations will be really different. So these are the questions that you can ask yourself in order to achieve a very good understanding of the remit, right? The task at hand. So how much time have you been allocated? Like I said, if it's a Viva presentation for your final project, if it's an academic presentation, they give you, okay, you have 10 minutes, you have 15 minutes, you have 20 minutes, right? And you have to manage your content within that 20 minutes. That doesn't mean from the minute 1 until 20th, you speak about your content, right? That's not how you arrange it. You have to allocate 5 minutes at least for the question and answer, Q&A segment, right? Introduction, 2 minutes. Content or the body part of it, something bigger than the introduction, right? But you need to allocate some time to do a conclusion. So managing the time or considering how much time you have is really important, because this will actually be one of the criteria, right, that you are marked under. So you will be graded how much or like how well you handle time, right? Time management actually has about 3 to 5 marks in an academic presentation, and also in other areas as well. Let's say it's a promotional presentation. Okay, you are at this really huge what do you call a conference where you can promote your company, right? And then the management says, okay, we have 10 minutes to promote our new product or service. So 10 minutes, within 10 minutes, how do you impress, right? You have to plan it correctly. Likewise. So that's why time is important. Okay. And then, are you required to stick to a common format or style? So usually this means a particular format, a default template for your slides, the presentation. Do you have a given topic beforehand, right? Stick to a common format or style. So if it's a company presentation, usually companies have their own or like developed default templates for slides. So when you do the presentation, you stick to that because specific colors and certain, let's say, GIFs or visualizations, certain videos that you can show. So are you required to do that? So ask the management or the one who sets you the task. So do I have to follow a particular style, or can I be independent and go ahead and do it? So ask it and get clarification about that, because it is something very important. Okay. Then lastly, have any guidelines been set regarding the content of your presentation, like a predetermined title or a fixed number of slides? So these are, again, things to consider, right, to achieve your task, right? Preparation. Now, I remember during my first master's, international relations, I did a group presentation with my group members, and we only had 15 to 20 minutes. So the maximum time was 20 minutes, but the number of slides was limited to 12 to 18, right? So because it's a group task, our group members prepared slides for their section separately, and we ended up with 65 slides. So it was absurd, and if the examiners were paying attention to the number of slides, it would have been really, cost us a lot of marks under that particular criteria, because we were supposed to have 12 to 18 slides. We have 65. It was a huge exceeding of the number of slides. So you can't do this. But usually in a group presentation, you have to have that negotiation, right? Talk to yourself, with your friends, and come to an agreement, like this is how we are going to handle it. So I think it was a really bad example to, show that, it's a very good example to show that you have to stick to it, but I wasn't sure whether I was deducted marks because we had that amount of slides. But if it's an academic presentation, we should stick to the number of slides that were given, right? So things like that can happen, but that's why we need to talk to each other and, stick to the given guidelines, because the guidelines are set because that amount of information, right, could actually be handled within this number of slides, right? These are standards usually set in the academic world. So to achieve your preparation properly, right, because when you prepare very well, right, your presentation, the next few stages will be really successful and easy. Okay, so coming out of preparation stage, we come to choosing our main points. How do we do it? Okay. First, of course, if it's a 10-minute presentation, you have to, stop at the maximum of 3 points, 3 main points, because based on the time you have for your presentation, this actually depends. If you have about 15 to 20 minutes for your presentation, that means you can discuss at least 5 points, but manage your time effectively, right? First, define your main points. Right? If it's a topic like, again, a promotional presentation for an audience, regarding a service that you're providing, then how do I deal with it? Okay, I talk about what it is and the benefits of it, and how are we going to deliver it to the customers. So 3 points figured out, and then go into details, right? Define your main points first, and no more than 3 main points if it's actually something around 10 to 15 minutes. Allow time for an adequate introduction and conclusion, like I said earlier, because introduction, when we discuss in the next few points, right, we have how to discuss or like go about the introduction or conclusion. When we discuss that, we'll go into detail, but allocating time for that is actually really necessary, because people need to see, okay, this is what we are going to hear. That's what happens in the introduction. You tell them, this is my presentation, and this will be the topic, these will be the main points, and then you go into the body. And once you finish all that, you need to conclude. You need to give them a summary. Discuss kale. So conclusion actually wraps everything up. If you actually finish without a conclusion, your circle of the presentation is not complete. So usually consider the presentation as a circular motion, which is going from a starting point and ending at that point after you complete your circle. So conclusion, usually in my experience, where my students do presentations, because they don't allocate a time for conclusion, they just rush off the last part and ruin the entire presentation, because there's no summary of it, right? Usually if it's a group presentation, allocate a separate person to wrap up the thing, right? And the introduction and the conclusion has to be really effective. So if you allocate really good speakers for these two functions, then your presentation will be really successful. Okay, but if you're doing it individually, you have to do it. So don't take too much time on that, but do it nicely and precisely to meet the requirement. Okay, so a powerful presentation delivers information in a logical, structured manner, building on the previous point and avoiding large jumps in sequence. So from one point to another, there should be a smooth transition, right? When we discuss the language to use in presentation, we will discuss this in detail. But there should be a logical structure in your presentation, developing on one point, giving supporting information, and then going into a conclusion, right? So that kind of movement, that dynamic movement, makes your presentation a really effective one. Okay, these are the questions that you should ask yourself when you choose your main points, right? What are the main points, right? What are they, right? Then and there, state them. And are these points structured in a logical, coherent way, right? When you say, okay, let's say you're doing a presentation about environmental pollution, so which is a really large area, right? If you're supposed to do a 10-minute presentation, it's not going to be possible to speak about environmental pollution in 10 minutes. So what are the main points you're going to discuss? So do you choose just one type of pollution, like air pollution, land pollution, or water pollution? Or do you talk about pollution in general, right? You can just stick to, talking about, main point is, what is it, right? What do you identify? Defining environmental pollution. And the second point would be causes for pollution. How does this happen? And then, as of the third point, you can say, these are the solutions that we can take to avoid this problem. So likewise, once you have figured out the 3 points, because you cannot speak all the information about this particular topic, you stick to this, and you need to tell your audience, I will only be discussing these things in a general manner, right? But if you're talking about water pollution, then tell them, I will be discussing water pollution and the definition to it, the causes of it, the effects of it, and ways to avoid it. So then it's logically and coherently organized, right? You can't speak the solutions of it first and then go into the definition and then say causes. It's like a salad, it's all mixed up. You can't do it that way, right? It has to be arranged in a structural, logical manner. Okay, right. Then you ask yourself, do these main points reflect your own objectives and take into account of the needs of your audience? Now, if you are presenting about environmental pollution, then that means your objective is to make a particular audience aware of this problem, like this is actually a global issue. So to create awareness, like, okay, do you need to give a definition? Yes, because then people know whether they are actually causing this problem, right? So definition to causes, to effects, and solutions to it. So do your points meet this particular objective that you're looking at? And once you choose your main point, you cannot avoid this part, choosing your supporting information. Okay, what do we talk about when we, there's a main point, and what do we talk about as supporting information? So these actually are there to help the audience understand, believe, and agree with your main points. When you have supporting data, right, it could be statistics, it could be a video showing, okay, how, let's consider pollution. If it's water pollution, you show them a video where, water is polluted, how people are struggling to have clean water. So when you show them something as a supporting, like backup evidence, then they believe you, right? They understand this is a global issue, right? And they could agree because there are statistics, there's proof, right? So that's why you should prepare with supporting information, right, when you do a presentation. Okay, then there's factual data, points of detail. This can come in different ways, like in the pictures that I'm showing you, right? It could be a picture, a diagram, video segment, right? Statistics. So anyway, if it is supporting to actually prove your main points, include it, right? Okay. So these are things to actually consider when you decide on your supporting information. What will add clarity to your argument? Clarity as in to clear everything off, right? Explaining complex terms, reminding your audience of any supporting theories. So you can do things like that in order to make your point understandable to your audience, right? Clarify it to them, right? It could be giving a definition, right? You tell them of a big word, but they might be wondering what that means, right? Explain it to them in simple terms, right? So what will add clarity? So consider that. And then what will add authority to your argument? Which means like authority to your argument in the sense, does your argument have any backup or validity to it, right? Making connections with other people's work, right? Quoting experts, offering evidence from your own research, right? People believe when they, get details and, statistics at their hands, like there's proof, right? You look at this, right? I'm not saying this because of a thought that I got in the shower, right? I have proof for this. So things like that. Now that adds authority or value to your argument, right? So you have to make connections or refer to other people's work. Then it adds credibility to your argument. So this authority could be the validation that you get from other people's work, evidence, right, research work, things like that. And also think about what will add color to your argument, right? Showing a video clip or a slide, using a practical example or a vibrant analogy. So if you can refer to something really that explains and clarifies everything, and also if you show a video, the audience will definitely watch that. I mean, this is a very good trick, but the video has to be very short and sweet, very concise and relatable to your presentation. It cannot, distract people. Sometimes, people are distracted, they're laughing and having their own conversations after the video. So it can't be like that. So it has to relate to your presentation topic, and it has to add color to it, as in it has to flourish it and make it bright. So if you think that's not going to happen, avoid doing that, right? So these are the things that you can consider in developing supporting information. Okay, so that comes with that comes the next step, which is establishing linking statements. Now we are on this fourth stage. We are here because this is now getting into your presentation. We prepared about the presentation, the content, we decided all that, and then main points and supporting points, we decided on all that. And now in this stage, this is where we develop the linear flow of the presentation, where you link one point to another and link your ideas very effectively, right? Now we are talking about linking statements, right? Using linking statements to show clearly how your main points fit together. This fits this one, like the compartments of a train. So this actually tells the audience, your students or the general public, whoever is listening to you, these kind of statements tell you about how much of things that you can understand. Like, I'm going from this point to another, right? From this point to the other point. Even if they weren't listening to a particular point, when you do the shifting or when you do the linking statement, they will understand, that point is over. Now he's talking about a new point, likewise, right? So it sends signals to your audience. So highlighting the next point in your argument, linking to the earlier ideas, or clarifying the stage you have reached in your argument. These kind of things actually clarifies a lot of things, or like makes sense. Your presentation makes sense to the audience. Okay, so common linking statements are like these, right? The next stage in our project was to do this, right? So they know, okay, the next stage, which means you have discussed one stage and you're moving on to the other, right? Likewise, another important issue of consideration was this one, right? Another issue. So you have talked about one earlier, now you're talking another, right? Then by following this argument, we can now see that. So if you have, of course, worked on an argument, and then they know, following this argument, now here's the result, right? So when you use linking statements, this is going to help your presentation to be very, very clear and understandable. So your task, one of the tasks you should do is to actually produce a script of your presentation. What are you going to say? Write it as a script, and then you can go into a very good presentation, because then at this slide I'm going to shift to the other point, and this is what I'm going to say. You don't have to memorize all of the words in the script, but know that these would be the things that I'm going to say, right? Now we come to what I said earlier, introduction and conclusion. So developing an opening, which means how do you start, right? Of course, we have prepared our presentation, and introduction is one of the biggest concerns of any presenter. How do you initiate, right? Use your introduction to lay a clear foundation for the presentation, right? You can start by introducing yourself, state what you will be talking about, a title or a subject. Now, this is useful for any teacher as well, because you should tell your students, this is what we are discussing today, right? Without just starting the lesson all of a sudden, right? Give them an introduction. Ask them what they already know about it, right? Likewise. So you have to state what you're going to talk about, right? State how you will be talking about it. This is why we in PowerPoint presentations, this is why we have a content slide, right? Where, you have the introduction, like how the layout of your presentation is presented, right? So tell them how would you be talking about it, right? By comparing test results or reviewing supporting literature. So you need to tell them, okay, after the introduction, I will be going into the body of it, and then I will be comparing test results, or you can say I'm reviewing the supporting literature. So likewise, right? And then in the introduction, you state what you intend to be the outcome of your presentation, right? An informed group, right? A lively discussion. So what is the outcome, right? After this presentation, what do you want to achieve, right? What do you want the audience to have achieved, right? You tell them that. And then state what you expect your audience to do. Listen, take notes, read a handout, ask questions. This could, be before the presentation, could be during and after. Usually what happens is that, people go into Q&A after the presentation, but you can tell them in the introduction, if you have any questions, note it down. We'll discuss them at the end of this presentation. So that's how you inform the audience. This is what I'm going to do in my presentation. So introduction should be on that. Introduction is not about defining any topics or, in my introduction, I'm going to discuss this, right? Right? It's not going to make sense, because introduction is for you to show the audience, okay, this will be my structure in the entire presentation, right? So they know, right? Likewise, they will understand, right? Okay. Always, like, this is very important. Always give your audience a moment to absorb this information before moving into your first main point. You have to give them a few seconds to absorb what you said. Right? Wait for a moment. Don't wait 2 minutes or so. Just 30 seconds, 40 seconds would be enough. Right? So that you can, plan your time accordingly. Okay. So we come to the sixth stage, where, another important point, just as the introduction, you have to develop a conclusion, right? This is actually used to remind your audience of your main points. And you tell them, okay, these are what I discussed. And also draw these points to a stimulating conclusion and leave your audience with a lasting impression. So you bring your main points again, bring up them in the last moment, and what is the conclusion, right? It has to be something striking and memorable, right? That leaves a lasting impression with your audience. So conclusion is a must, right? That's why you should plan it beforehand, right? Okay, the following structure provides a powerful conclusion. So these points, if you follow it accurately, you can come up with a very good conclusion. A review of your title or subject area, a summary of your main points, a summary of the process you have been through, and a conclusion clearly drawn from your main points. It has to come from your main points. So, and a parting statement to stimulate your audience's thoughts, right? Like a question, a bold statement, right? It could be, something to grab their attention, right? When you wrap it up, they have to be in awe, right? They could wonder, like, okay, like finally, this is the outcome of it, right? So a lasting impression. So follow this structure, right? And then you'll be quite successful. Okay. That's why, introduction, conclusion, you should, do it in the planning process. And also, right, finally, with this we come to the last stage of the presentation planning process, reviewing your presentation. Once you have written your presentation, make sure that you review its content, right? What have I written so far? Can I do it within the time, right? Is it too much information? Is there repetition, right? So ask yourself, does the presentation meet your objectives, right? Okay, I have been given to talk about this. Do I actually meet my objectives, right? Is it logically structured? Is there a clear logical argument, logical order of my points? Then have you targeted material at the right level for your audience, right? If it's general public, if they are adults going into business environment, then you should come up with examples and even colors for your slides, right, to match their level of maturity, I would say, right? So target the material at the right level for your audience. So even the slides and their font, type of font, the font size and everything, they have to meet with the audience, right? Are you catering it enough and in the necessary requirement? Okay. And also consider, is the presentation too long or too short? So once you review all this, right, if it's too short, then your information is not enough. Maybe you're missing out on some important part of it. If it's too long, it's going to be boring for the audience, right? Have you used any interest-piquing videos or some elements like that? You can tell a story, you can ask them questions, you can refer to certain people's work, where you get the attention of the audience and keep them interested in listening to you. Do you do it correctly? So reviewing is really important, right? Because it will tell you how good you are in gathering information. Now remember, you have not done your presentation yet, right? This is preparing for it. These are like how wide you have to consider when you meet a particular topic and deliver something, right, some content to a particular audience. So there are so much to consider, so much to give attention to, and we go into detail, right? So it's not something you do overnight, right? If you have 1 week to prepare, you take 2 days to gather information and then go into structuring it accurately and necessarily. And then of course you have to keep some days, like at least 2 days or 3 days to practice it, reviewing it, writing your script, do it and prepare the slides. Do you have the slides accordingly? Likewise. So there are so many things to consider, and an effective presenter actually will go into all this trouble and getting it right, because this will actually reflect your personality and the content that you present in your slides, the organization of the information in your slides or any other audiovisual supplements that you have. So with all that, right, it tells how a good presenter you are. So if you are looking at a presentation, right, to do a presentation recently, so go into this kind of a planning process. So it will definitely help you to be a really good presenter. Okay, with that, I would like to wrap it up. So this is only the very first topic of this chapter, and there are so many other things, other areas that we should discuss, and this is only the start of it. So I believe you gain some knowledge, and of course I believe I mentioned some interesting points that you should consider. And finally, I should tell, like, all these points are taken from AAT textbook for business communication. So if you get the book, you will see these points elaborated clearly. So I encourage you to join us, and thank you for listening to Tutor.lk. And this is actually a new platform for English, right? Business communication, even though it's related to fields of accounting, business and economics. It's English that we are studying here under this topic, subject. So I wish you had a good experience at this, and I hope you will be joining us and continuing your studies, higher studies, while enjoying the learning of the language, which is something you cannot live in this world today. So thank you very much for your time, and I will be seeing you next week. So, okay. Thanks a lot. Have a nice day.